Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. Venezuela's government, i.e. President Nicolas Maduro, has claimed that his forces have foiled a coup plot and an assassination plot against him as well as his family members. The assassination plot would have then resulted in the placement of a former member of the Hugo Chavez government, a former defense minister, pardon me, I should say, would be then placed in place as the premier of the country. This, of course, coming on the heels of the fact that Juan Guaido, has already declared himself the leader of the country and the president, and has been recognized by many countries around the world, as well as that political crisis separately continues as well. Maduro has blamed Guaido and then, of course, the United States, Colombia, as well as Chile as well for being involved in this latest coup plot. To discuss this all a bit further, we're joined now by Gabriel, Clavijo, who is a teacher in political sciences, a researcher in human rights, Latin American studies. He's joining us now from Bogota in Colombia. We're also joined by Guillermo Aveledo, who is a professor of political science at UNIMED. He's joining us now from Caracas in Venezuela. Guillermo and Gabriel, thank you both for joining us. Guillermo, I'd like to start with you. What do you know about this coup plot and the details coming out of it? And why do you think it was that this specific gentleman, this former defense minister, was chosen by whoever it is that carried out this coup or wanted to carry out this coup as the one who would become premier?
Well, the plot of the plot, if you may, it's formed with the center, the epicenter of power politics in Venezuela. If it's true, however, what we know as of now, it's very scant information just given by the propaganda minister and by the president himself. There's no independent judiciary review of this matter at all. There's no independent investigation in any course. But of course, we are not talking of a government that would allow that. However, what we can surmise from this plot is that there is it was aiming, if it had happened, if it had been planned as has been announced, towards the center of the government, to the two major areas of civilian leadership and military leadership. Minister Padrino has been the leader of the armed forces for a while now. There have been rumors of his replacement by the president for a while now. Perhaps it's also a way by the president of announcing his retirement. He's due for retirement. He's been due for retirement for about 2 years now. And there have been issues with the government and so as to how to retire Mr. Padrino, who was not quelled major dissent in the armed forces, and while President Maduro trusts him, he has not find him confident enough or capable enough now to thwart dissent within the armed forces. However, he's a loyal military officer with the government. He's loyal with Mr. Maduro, and he will remain there if as long as possible, as far as we can see. Now, trying to attack General Padrino means, in that thwarted plot, that they were trying to control the center of government, create a vacuum, a leadership vacuum within the armed forces. However, I think that's far-fetched in reality.
Okay. All right, so let me go to Gabriel, if you allow me for a moment. Gabriel, you're sitting in Colombia, and Maduro has pointed the finger at the Colombian president, Ivan Duque, for this plot, this coup plot. And in fact, Colombia's foreign minister hasn't really directly even referred to this charge. He's just said his country would continue to act through political and diplomatic means in Venezuela. Do you believe, Gabriel, that Colombia was involved?
Well, it's a complicated situation because the position of the Colombian government and the president, Duque, is to attack directly and close all the spaces from the Maduro's regime here in Latin America, and especially in Latin America. It was a directory of his campaign of government. And I think that he's a leader of international movement to close the spaces in diplomatic spaces of the regime of Maduro abroad. Chile and Peru are in those campaign, and I think that it's a political very strong from the Colombian government.
But Gabriel, it's a very big deal, isn't it? If there was an assassination plot against Maduro, I mean that's quite different than just diplomatic pressure.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think that the position of the Colombian government is denounce and say hello. Here we have a big problem. We have a lot of problems with the human rights and the refugees, but I don't think. Honestly, I don't think that it's a complot or something like that. I think that it's more a position or desperate position from Maduro or Padrino on all the people of the government there in Venezuela to keep the control of the government around the lies or around the fake news or around all of that things, all of that stuff. But I think it's true. The position of the Colombian government is very aggressive in the field of the international relationships.
Okay, Guillermo, so I wonder, you've heard there from a Colombian himself, do you think that any of these regional countries should even be involved in such a fashion, be it Colombia, be it Chile, or even further away, the United States?
If they should be involved in such a fashion, I don't think they should. I think they must in any way. I mean, there's one thing to mount political pressure, international sanctions, and that's a legitimate show of force by some governments. But to organize a plot would be preposterous, and it would quell any efforts to settle agreement. If they're now proposing that, I mean, what we've seen in the last few weeks is the de-escalation of the rhetoric, of the armed rhetoric by especially the United States, and as far as the Colombian and Chilean government are concerned, they're being very adamant not to support any armed intervention. Some politicians in those countries have supported armed intervention, and some politicians in those countries are very keen and pressuring their own governments to do so. But I don't think the actual Chilean and Colombian governments would be involved. However, there's a history of violence within the region and the history of violence and violent actors in Colombia. And I really don't think that as of itself is too far-fetched, that they might be willing to hatch these plots.
So in some ways, Guillermo, is this an excuse? Is this the perfect excuse for Maduro to continue an even tougher crackdown on the opposition? He's promised to do that. He said that he will now be ruthless with the opposition after this alleged coup plot was thwarted.
Well, yes, of course. It's a great excuse. It's a great frame up for that matter. And perhaps some innocent will pay for what others are preparing, or others more radical. As far as we know, as far as there have been statements on the matter, there are no such plans. Of course, such plans wouldn't be public or possible. And I don't think would be either legitimate or accepted. Most Venezuelans do not support armed intervention. Most Venezuelans do not support an assassination plot. That's just too preposterous. In Venezuela, there's no tradition of assassination plots of themselves.
Okay.
And we still don't know what happened last year with President Maduro in July and last July when there was a thwarted assassination attempt, a claimed assassination attempt. There have been more crackdown, so it might be a frame up, as you mentioned, for that.
Gabriel, I want to bring you in and ask you, Gabriel, looking again back at the regional countries as well, such as Colombia and others, we're sort of in a stalemate situation now, aren't we? As Guillermo there correctly pointed out, it seems that the rhetoric from the U.S. and some of the countries had become a bit calmer recently, at least. Do you think that will once again pick up, or what are the next steps, really? Because Guaido obviously has denied that he was behind this plot. He's said that there have been many such accusations in the past by the Maduro government, but they have not been proven. What is the next step for Venezuela? Because we have two leaders, essentially, in Venezuela. The situation can't continue like that, can it?
It's a complicated situation because we have a government. In fact, it's the government of Maduro. It's a regime recognized for a lot of countries around the world. But in the other hand, we have the government of Guaido. It's very difficult because we don't have like a government parallels here in Latin America. In fact, here right now, we have in Medellin, the second city around, in the second village here in Colombia, we have the convention, the reunion of the American states, the OAI. And right now, we called the representatives of Guaido's government. And yesterday, the government of Uruguay wake up from the table because he didn't recognize the government of Guaido. He recognized the government of Maduro. And it's it's like a cut in the in the relationships of the Latin American countries. Traditionally, we were very united in the positions of our relation of our foreign relations. But right now, we have a division very, very, very strong here in Latin America with all the countries with the position of Guaido.
About this divide, then, as Gabriel there was correctly pointing out, there is a division certainly within the region, seemingly, about which sides each government is taking, be it Maduro or Guaido. But again, that situation cannot continue, into the unforeseen future. I mean, we can't just have this permanent stalemate where Guaido says he rules, Maduro says he rules, the army still seemingly with Maduro. I imagine that for Venezuelans on the ground, the situation is becoming quite ridiculous, isn't it?
I think that the position of Guaido is very uncertain because he don't have an effectively power in the international community. A part of the speeches, a part of the social nets, a part of the communications of the government, he don't have more than this. The forces, the army, the navy, the air force are with Maduro, and Maduro is still. Meanwhile, he have the power of the army for the forces in Venezuela. He will stay in the power, I think, because it needs the power, the decided support of the army to break down the regime in Venezuela, and we don't have that, and Venezuela don't have that in this moment.
Guillermo, what are your thoughts about how much longer this can continue? I imagine, because you're sitting in Venezuela, Guillermo, the situation is becoming quite unsustainable for many Venezuelans, and it has been like that for a very long time, hasn't it?
The social and economic situation has been in a sort of on ice. I mean, there's a lot of economic depression. There's a huge and large and deep economic crisis. But the main issue here is that there's a sort of tiredness the society is very, very tired of the actual conflict, even though they're very, very upset with the Maduro government. I mean, if there were elections, we are very sure that the Maduro government would lose, and the Socialist Party would lose in any coming elections. However,
but then I wonder, Guillermo, is there enough support for Guaido to come out on top? Do you think that Venezuelans support him enough for him to be able to lead?
I'm not really sure about that right now. I mean, the support for Mr. Guaido has lowered from the top 80% to now 60-50% in some cases. And in the case of Mr. Maduro, well, his support is low. his recognition has grown. I mean, most people are either attuned to the fact that Guaido is their president, but they recognize Mr. Maduro. They have no other choice. And some polls are not actually showing that while they don't like Mr. Maduro, they recognize him as president, as legitimate president. And then the claim of legitimacy by Mr. Guaido has been very weakened in the last few weeks. There have been corruption allegations within his circle. There have been accusations of mismanagement of funds. There have also been important accusations of not accusation, but actual tiredness regarding his political stance. I mean, the overconfident stance of the prior months, the botched coup attempt in May 30th. Those situations have created a sort of not a leadership vacuum in the opposition, but a weakening of Mr. Guaido and his negotiating hand. And now he's in a negotiating table with Mr. Maduro through representatives, and this has been, it's not his best position to be.
Very well. We'll leave there as a final word. Jen, of course, we appreciate both of your time and expert insight. We'll thank Gabriel and Guillermo there for, of course, speaking to us. And it was early morning in both of those places, so we sincerely appreciate, of course, both of you for waking up this early and speaking to us and sharing your thoughts with us. Important points there made because certainly it is possible and it's plausible that Nicolas Maduro could just be using this assassination plot, this coup plot, as a ruse to go after the opposition. That's certainly a possibility, but you can't put it behind and beyond the United States, Colombia, or Chile even, to be behind this, because again, that region has had political violence for a number of years now. So is it possible that all of the above wanted to assassinate Maduro? There was that plot last year, I believe, as well. A drone, I believe it was possibly going to be used to assassinate Maduro and his family members. This time around, a military chief would also have been assassinated, and a former defense minister would have been placed as the prime minister, the premier of the country. All of this sounds like something out of a novel, really. But what's important, as Guillermo, they said, is that there is fatigue now amongst the people. They've had enough. The situation has been going on for too long. Guaido's lost his support because he hasn't been able to prove any leadership, really. And Maduro's hand seems to be weakening on a daily basis as well, possibly again, from what we've understood. We'll keep a close eye, though, on that situation in Venezuela here in Sculp. I'll be back after a short break with our next segment. Thank you for staying with us, viewers. In this segment of Scope, we're going to discuss the G20 Summit, which has already begun in Osaka, Japan. Top of the agenda is obviously the ongoing trade war between China and the United States, the world's two biggest economies. Prime Minister Abe of Japan, for his part, cautioned that abrupt changes from globalization can bring the quote-unquote temptation for protectionism. That, of course, an indirect message to President Donald Trump of the United States. Well, obviously, there are other things on the agenda as well, be it the tech war as well, which the two countries find themselves in as well. We've recently had tech companies in the United States also warning President Trump against further tariffs, saying that that would in fact hurt their own competitiveness globally as well. To discuss all of that a bit further, we're joined now by Manuel Modoni, who is an Asia-Pacific analyst. He's joining us now from Rome. We're also joined by Claudia Astarita, who is a lecturer at Sciences Po Paris. She's also non-resident fellow at the Asia Institute at the University of Melbourne. She's currently joining us from Paris. And we're also joined by Christian Bluth, who is a project manager at program Megatrends at Bertelsmann Stiftung. He is joining us now from Germany. Christian, Claudia, and Manuel, thank you all for joining us. Christian, I'd like to start with you. There's a lot, obviously, on the table when it comes to the G20, but of course, as Prime Minister Abe of Japan said, it's about protectionism, about tit for tat, restrictive trade measures that are being placed around the world. How concerning is that, do you think?
This is very concerning indeed. What we see in the newspaper actually about the rising tariffs between China and the United States is actually just the tip of the iceberg. If you look at the data, you can see that protectionism all over the world over the last decade or so has been on the rise. So it is actually very important that the G20 leaders discuss this issue and find a solution for this, because nobody actually gains from tariffs or protectionism. It just constitutes fewer chances for development and globalization and less chances to trade with each other. So both gains for everyone are zero.
Indeed. Manuel, what are your thoughts about that? Because, certainly if you have such restrictive trade measures between countries, then obviously political tensions come along with that, don't they?
Yes, I agree. I think the problem is that Shinzo Abe will try to convince President Trump of his positions, but I think he will also try not to upset Trump for his trade war with China. So since Shinzo Abe has some trade deals negotiations ongoing with the United States, they will be very careful in raising this issue. And I do believe that also Trump, the main objective of Trump for his meeting with Abe is to try to reduce the trade deficit between Japan and the U.S., trying to get some better deals with Japan. But I do believe also that the main issue in this G20 will be also the trade war between China and Japan. And although Shinzo Abe is committed to try to, let's say, not solve this dispute, but to deal with it, because also Japan and China have significant trade relationships, it's a bit difficult to understand how it will end without knowing what will happen between President Trump and President Xi Jinping.
Claudia, it strikes one that G20, the WTO, all of these organizations have been sort of slow to pick up on the fact that globalization has occurred, but they haven't been reforming themselves when it comes to trade enough, at least, to be able to reflect the fact that we now live in a multipolar world. And that's been the complaint, of course, specifically, of course, towards the WTO, the World Trade Organization. Do you think that that is a fair complaint, and will that reform come soon enough?
I think this is a fair complaint, especially from a country like China. And China has been trying to, to change the voting system of the WTO and the level of representativeness of China and other developing countries in the WTO to reflect the current equilibrium of power and economic capacity of in the world. At the same time, of course, whenever we have a privilege, whenever one have a privilege, doesn't want to renounce to it. So there has been a lot of resistance in reforming this institution. But I think it was very myopic to take this approach, because now China is just trying to change the system in another way. And this is becoming more dangerous for us and for the rest of the world, and less controllable at the same time. So.
That's an interesting point. And Christian, then does one then reform these huge organizations such as the WTO, which have an influence over vast sums of money that are traded and products and services, et cetera, around the world? I imagine that's not an easy task, but it really needs to be done somehow, doesn't it, Christian?
Yeah. No, reforming the WTO is both crucial but also very difficult to do. I think probably the most important point that makes it very difficult to adjust this organization to the 21st century is that it operates by consensus. So unless you can get 164 countries to agree, you're not going to go anywhere. So I think one important element is to flexibilize this system. And we see first attempts on that. There's sort of negotiations amongst subgroups of the membership, for example, on e-commerce or investment facilitation, and they actually seem to be going well. So there is a small sign that the system can maybe heal itself. But these technical discussions, which could be good news, are actually held hostage by a larger geopolitical conflict between the US and China. And my fear is that this geopolitical conflict will actually make these small good signs that the system is starting to work again, will render them null and void.
So do you think, Christian, if I may say, do you think, Christian, that Europe is prepared for there to be reforms within the WTO? Because Europe also finds itself at a certain level in a minor or a mini trade war of itself, doesn't it, with the United States?
Right. This is certainly true. I think Europe is prepared to reform the WTO, but so is everyone else. I mean, there is agreement that the WTO should be reformed. If you think back to the last G20 summit in Buenos Aires, there was even language in the final statement that the WTO should be reformed. It's just that the major players have very different ideas in which direction the system should evolve. So we don't know yet what kind of reform will come.
Indeed. Okay, so Manuel, one interesting point which happened today at the G20 summit was when the tech war, if I may call it that, was spoken about, and Xi Jinping called for a fair, just, and non-discriminatory market environment. Trump, though, was more cautious about that, and he said that we need to expand digital trade, but also ensure the resilience and security of our 5G network. Do you think that can be resolved, Manuel? Because 5G seems to be the word of the day, and no country around the world wants to miss out on that.
Well, yes, that's an interesting question because also we have the same problem here in Italy. I do believe that 5G is quite important, and you cannot avoid to deal with it. But on the other hand, we feel the pressure of the United States, since they don't want to implement such technology because it's, let's say, it's critical to their own security system for cybersecurity threats. So I do believe that 5G will be dealt somehow, but it's difficult because G20 is a forum, so it's not a place, in my opinion, where this issue will be resolved, especially with, for example, Russia. They don't want to change so much the WTO, while other countries, they want it. So I do believe that probably Trump will try to get a win, especially for the incoming elections, while on the other hand, Xi Jinping may consider some kind of strategical retreat, but cannot be humiliated on this, and also he will try to put forward this national interest. So I do not think that they will reach some kind of agreement that cannot be, except for a truce, they cannot reach that much, in my opinion.
That's interesting. Claudia, do you agree with that? Do you think maybe we're all hoping for a bit too much to happen at the G20 or the sidelines of the G20 when it comes to this tech war, trade war, whatever we want to call it, between China and the US? Should we keep our expectations muted? And what does that then mean going forward? Will there be a truce, or will tariffs continue on both sides?
Well, I think it depends on what kind of expectation we have. Because, of course, in a couple of days, we cannot get many things done. But I think it was actually a very good sign to see Trump and Xi Jinping agreeing in restarting the negotiation over the trade war. What does it mean? This means that they are opening the door for negotiators to continue working and discussing the issue, and at the same time allowing, if you like, both Xi Jinping and Trump to remain on their corner, just saying that they don't want to compromise, they want to remain tough towards the other, but at the same time, somebody is talking. And having a conversation going on is better than not having one. At the same time, we have, yes, through the 5G issue. This is another very complex issue because it's true that the United States are trying to avoid China to monopolize the 5G market. But at the same time, where are the alternatives? So if we don't offer a realistic alternative, we have been seeing that in Southeast Asia in particular and in Central Asia as well, more and more countries have decided to accept the Chinese 5G. But of course, they don't have the technologies, they don't have the infrastructure, they don't have another country that is offering this. So at the end of the day, they need to go for China. And also, on the sideline, there is the North Korea issue. It was not a coincidence that Donald Trump received a letter And then that actually Kim Jong-un received a letter from Trump, then he met Xi Jinping, and then Donald Trump received a letter from Kim Jong-un. So for sure there is something going on. I think we will never know what the leaders are telling each other when they are by themselves alone, away from cameras and media. But at the same time, finding a compromise or continuing the dialogue is more productive for both of them. So from this perspective, I think we achieved a lot with this G20. Yeah.
Okay, so Christian, I'm going to give you the floor. We have about a minute left, Christian. The G20, Christian, comprises of 19 countries. Obviously, I'm just saying this for the viewers' sake, and the EU. It represents more than 80% of the world's economic output and 2/3 of its people. And its obviously primary aim was to ensure financial stability worldwide. Do you think that in 2019, the G20 has been able to deliver on that? And will it be able to sort of weather this storm and try to ensure that there is stability in global markets?
I think the G20 is an enormously important forum and really has a role to play in economic policy making. I think it will live up to that actually in the long run as a platform for discussions. But I think in the current context where we're in standoff between China and the US on trade, where we have a heating up US presidential campaign, it'll be very difficult to reach any substantial conclusions. But still, better to be talking than not talking.
Indeed, better to be talking than not talking. Okay, we'll leave it there at that. We'll thank Christian, Claudia, and Manuel for their time speaking to us today about the G20, and of course for sharing their expert insight with us. The G20 is important, as all of our guests are said, viewers. This is at least, as Christian there said at the end, the fact that people are at least talking to each other. So the Chinese and Americans talking to each other, and others, of course, talking about other issues. There's a whole range of issues that we can pick on, not just, of course, the trade/tech war between China and the United States, but there are other issues of immigration, of the tensions in the Middle East region, et cetera, et cetera. All of that, of course, has a huge impact on global financial stability and the global economy as investors look on with nervousness. We'll keep a close eye on all the updates coming out of the G20, and we'll be talking about this tomorrow as well here in Scope. But thanks for watching that part. For now, I'll be back after a short break with my final segment. Welcome back, viewers. We're still here in Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. In this final segment, we're going to discuss the National Security Agency of the United States, which has been found improperly collecting Americans' phone data yet again. This is, of course, reminiscent of what occurred a number of years ago as well. Edward Snowden, of course, had whistleblown on this very issue and spoken about the NSA's activities, many of them, of course, illegal. Congress and Senate have tried to rein in the NSA's activities to an extent, of course, while allowing it to be able to keep the homeland secure, quote unquote. But on one side, of course, intelligence community, some members of the intelligence community argue that what the NSA does is vital and there shouldn't be as many red lines on it. On the other side, the argument is that has the NSA proven that it has actually caught any terrorist plot so far? And that answer seemingly is no. So why this invasion of privacy? Why is this being allowed? To discuss this further, we're now joined by Steve Hewitt, who is a senior lecturer at the University of Birmingham. He's joining us now from Birmingham itself. Steve, as always, thanks for joining us here in Scope. What do you make of what occurred here? The NSA is blaming the telephone companies themselves.
It appears to be just a case, again, of business as usual. I mean, this has been an ongoing matter going right back to post 9/11. Just to give your viewers a little background on this, after 9/11, the Bush administration made a decision that they would basically avoid having to go through courts and to get warrants, and they secretly ordered the NSA to begin these mass surveillance programs. I mean, it sounds a bit conspiratorial, but this is part of what Snowden later revealed, and it was leaked through other sources as well. So prior to 9/11, going back to the 1970s, when the existence of the National Security Agency was first revealed, there was something set up called the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, and then something known as the court, whereby you had to go and get a warrant if you wanted to do this. So the Bush administration avoided this, and what it led to was the NSA bringing in reams and reams of information. Yeah. This came out through Snowden. efforts were made to curtail this, to restrict it, to bring back the necessity of getting a warrant. And now we know that these same sorts of problems keep popping up, that they're collecting the wrong data, collecting data that they shouldn't have illegally have collected. And now we're having to expunge such records.
So, there's an Steve, by some people, such as the ACLU, that this entire agency should be done away with. Do you agree with that?
I wouldn't go so far. I mean, this is an agency that's been around since 1952 that has lacked the sort of oversight that, say, something like the Central Intelligence Agency, FBI have had. It wasn't until the 1970s that there was any sort of public acknowledgement that it even existed. It has a massive budget. I mean, Snowden revealed in 2013 its budget for that year was close to $11 billion US. So it's a massive budget. And it is, dealing with all kinds of information. And, the computer systems it has it's beyond the scale of even imagining. How effective it is, I think, is a whole other question. I mean, this is the nature of intelligence. And, in terms of it, it's a very complicated in terms of how we understand how effective actually it is.
And on that point, in fact, about how effective this agency is, the question that is asked is that how safe have you kept us? Have you averted any terrorist attack, for example? And the answer seems to be no, that there hasn't been any information found. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Steve, but that seems to be then a huge failing of this agency, doesn't it? What purpose will it serve going forward? Is it necessary to keep Americans safe?
I think I mean, if you think about it, this was an agency that was created to basically for the U.S. government to spy on other governments, diplomatic communication, military communication during the Cold War, the leadership of the Soviet Union. It's not really that an effective tool for going after small numbers of terrorists operating, somewhere around the world. And also, even the nature of terrorism has changed. Increasingly, we see these so-called lone actor terrorist attacks where they aren't part of a cell, they aren't communicating with each other. Indeed. And the model, in effect, that the NSA is following is sort of a 9/11 model where you have this really well-organized plot, connected to a particular organization.
Let me ask you, Steve, then the next step after what happens now with these continuous revelations, what do you think lawmakers should be doing now? Because, it seems that whatever is being done at this point in time, and you pointed out the lone actors, where exactly is the intelligence community going wrong, or are we placing too much importance on just the intelligence community in all of this, in keeping people safe, if that is, at least the stated aim of these agencies?
I think we've sort of inflated the significance of these agencies that they in some ways are more important when it comes to government than to dealing with terrorists. So, I think it looks like there might be momentum now in the U.S. to take away this power of the NSA that was originally in the Patriot Act and then in the U.S. Freedom Act that replaced the Patriot Act. And thereby they will not be able to sort of do this bulk collection in any form anymore. And then it'll be much narrower. And that, if you think about it, if you've got a tip, if you've got a lead, then you get a warrant and then you go after the particular information.
One of the things that's interesting about all of this, Steve, is that when we're talking about the age of privacy, many people would argue on the other side that, listen, if you have nothing to hide, why not allow a government to sift through your personal details?
My late grandfather used to make that very point, that if you've got nothing to hide, then you don't have to worry about the police. And I just think, where it leads to is in effect, we have no more privacy. And then you've got government agencies building up databases and who knows how that information might be used in the future by different administrations. The future of counterterrorism in many respects is sort of AI. It's about algorithms. And those are the sorts of things that once you get trapped in those systems, it will be very hard to get out of them. And it is quite, I think, worrying where we're going in terms of technology and counterterrorism in the future.
All right, and that's a very good point to end off on then, Steve. We'll leave it there at that. But of course, you get your time. Speaking to us today, that was Steve Hewitt, Senior Lecturer at the University of Birmingham, speaking to us from Birmingham there via Skype. Discussing, of course, this worrying case of the NSA once again being caught, collecting data which it wasn't allowed to collect by any court. And of course, all of this happening after 9/11, since the Snowden revelations came out, the NSA, of course, under the spotlight, even in the United States. Steve, they're correctly pointing out this isn't actually just about keeping the homeland safe, but it's actually about, monitoring communication with outside governments and their communications with, be it Americans or between themselves or otherwise. So all of this, of course, the Pandora's box was opened since 9/11, where privacy has now become a luxury, not a right, seemingly. And it seems that there is really no place around the world which is completely private. There is no way to completely keep our information private from prying eyes. We'll keep a close eye on that situation and how the NSA responds and or reforms itself, and what U.S. lawmakers may propose in the coming days in that regard as well. I'll leave it there for now, though. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.